It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Today's kind of a special day in our household. It was 24 years ago today that my wife and I tied the knot. We ran off to Waterbury, Vermont, got married, honeymooned at Ben & Jerry's, and spent an incredible 2 weeks getting there and tooling around New England in the fall, doing the leaf peeping and spending time as Mr. and Mrs. We've been together now 28 years now, and every day has just been better than the next. And I look forward to 28 more years as we get through the moment that we're in. And I want to thank everyone who has sent thoughts and prayers and vibes and good thoughts and all of that stuff, and cards and letters and all kinds of things. Thank you. It has meant an awful lot. We are moving hopefully in the right direction. Time will tell where we're going to go, but I want to thank everyone for that. And look, yesterday on the program, we talked about Vice President Harris's plan to expand Medicare to ensure that when people need long-term care, they can do it at home. And I got tons of responses from people who are going, I worked at a nursing home and I've done home health care and I've done this. A bunch of people saying, look, it makes no sense that we institutionalize people. It makes no sense that we're warehousing people. And look, when I was a kid, my mother worked in one of these warehousing nursing homes. Again, 70s, much different than today, but I still remember the smell. I remember the misery of the people who were there and the fact that nobody came to visit them. And that was the thing that my entire life has stuck with me. And I've said this before. I've told my wife this before. If you find me on the ground, just leave me. Do not ever send me to a nursing home. That would be a fate for me worse than death. Now, look, I'm sure there are wonderful nursing homes out there. I'm sure there are great people doing amazing work in those nursing homes and doing what they can. But the reality is, for the majority of us working people, it's cost prohibitive. I mean, the amount of money being spent, I have a friend who's now in one, and it's like $20,000 a month. Who can get that kind of money for a long period of time? So the idea of ensuring that people get to stay in their homes and get some care in their homes, great idea. In fact, it's something I've been advocating for at least a decade now. When my grandparents had some issues, when my grandfather, he had diabetes real bad. They ended up taking off a leg. He needed help, but he was able to get that at home because the family could afford it. Now to say, as part of Medicare, we're going to ensure that everyone gets that everyone gets to stay in their home. This is huge. And it's the kind of aspirational politics that I've been talking about for a long time. The idea that we can make lives better. The idea that we can do big things. And, I talk about aspirational politics a lot. And the reality is it's only possible if we're aspirational, if we demand better, if we want better. And we stop voting for the worst among us. And, the thing that gets me is I keep hearing, well, we need to solve greed problems with greed solutions. We should need to throw more money at it. We need to throw more money into nursing home care. No, a lot of that gets institutionalized. We've been privatizing, nursing homes for years now. Wall Street, vulture capitalists, big money, they've bought a lot of it up. And not because they care about giving the best care possible, providing the best product. No. They want to fleece not only the people, the residents, but the federal government. And they've figured out that, hey, if we can take these over, we can slash wages, we can slash benefits, we can slash staffing levels. we can line our pockets. And I've been saying, instead of greed solutions to greed problems, we need sane tax policy. We need tax solutions. You want to start with a good move? Start taxing the extraordinarily wealthy. I'm not talking about the rich. I'm talking about the extraordinarily wealthy. And the best way I've heard the difference between rich and wealthy is, a guy said, Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The guy who signs his paycheck is wealthy. And that's the reality. You may have a good sum of money right now, and I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about institutional, long-term, generational wealth. This idea that we have a class in this country that's beyond being taxed is ludicrous, especially when you consider that what built this country, when people think of, when America was great, they think of our grandparents' generation, the post-World War II era, when tax rates were 92% on the very, very wealthy. And what you had then is you had very strong labor unions and a very high tax rate, which meant that, CEOs got their perks, got their stuff, but they didn't line their pockets like they do today. I saw a statistic that you said in 1965, when union density was at its height, 35%, average CEO was paid 21 times what the typical worker was making. So 21 times seems like a good living. You make $1,000 a week. This guy's making 21 grand a week. It seems a lot, but it's in the ballpark. Now what you've got in 2023, CEOs were paid over 290 times as much. And you go, well, how? Well, our tax code for one. Because, back in the 60s, nobody wanted to go, I'm going to make 290 times what the worker is going to make, and I'm just going to pay it all the way in taxes. They reinvested that money in their businesses. They reinvested it in education and healthcare, and they did philanthropic stuff, which is why their names are slapped on everything. But we don't do that. And what we've lived under the last 50 years is supply-side voodoo, trickle-down Reaganomics, which has been nothing more than we get trickled on while they rob our pockets and load future generations, their future generations, with, unimaginable wealth. A massive redistribution of wealth from the people who actually show up to work every day, do the work, create the profit, to the people who the hardest day's work they do is moving money from one pocket to the other. I say we tax the rich and we invest that money in workers, in working families, in communities. And that's why, look, our politics have devolved to where they are right now for a reason. And I use the quote attributed to Jay Gould quite often. I can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. Divide and conquer works. As long as they've got us talking about whatever the ridiculous issue du jour is, we're not talking about the fact that we're getting ripped off in our paychecks. We're not talking about the fact that we got less healthcare opportunities, that we've got less educational opportunities, that we have less opportunities, period, that our standard of living has been falling. And yet what we do when we realize, oh, gee, things have gotten worse, is we blame the people behind and under us, which kind of insane. It's like that cartoon that I love so much of a guy, of a rich, big CEO with 9 cookies on his plate. And, a bunch of people, sitting around a table, got, the CEO going, hey, that guy's going to take your cookie. That's where we are. And for me, this election is about what kind of a country are we going to have? Where are we going to move for our children? My wife and I, before the accident, we were talking about what life was going to look like. Because I'm a planner. I'm thinking 5 years down the road. My mind is always on what if. It's the if and then the then. If this, then that. If Trump becomes president, I see bad things for workers. I see a recession on the horizon. I see massive tax breaks for the very wealthy. I see more deregulation. I see a Supreme Court that continues to move in a direction that strips rights away from citizens and working people and voters, and the pendulum swinging towards a very fascistic, very corporate style of governance. Now, for some, that may work. The buses run on time. But for the majority, I can't see that being palatable for long. So in this moment, between now and Election Day, it's important to think about where we want to go. Do we want the guttural politics that we hear out of the Donald Trumps? Everyone's going to be like Detroit. Or do we want a country that thinks big, that thinks opportunity, that thinks aspirationally, that thinks that we can build stuff, we can leave something for our children? That's the world that I want to live in. That's the country I want to be a part of. The one that says, hey, we can and we will. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, James Kirby, chairman of the Teamsters National Black Caucus, going to be here right after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Thanks for tuning in to The Rick Smith Show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @Rick Smith Show, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all that and much more at thericksmithshow.com.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So, labor reporter Stephen Greenhouse has got a new article out talking about how unions are right now stepping up their efforts, knocking on doors, making phone calls, kissing babies, doing whatever they've got to do to wake up the membership to realize that Donald Trump is not their friend. Remind them of what 4 years of Donald Trump looked like for organizers who want to join and form unions, for union leaders who had to go and fight before an NLRB that was extremely hostile. Kind of a reminder, if you will. I don't think you should need one. I lived through it. It was bad. But here to share some thoughts on, well, what organizations are doing and what members are doing. I've asked my good friend James Kirby to come talk with us. Kirb is the chairman of the Teamsters National Black Caucus. He's also a member of Teamsters Local 480 in Nashville, Tennessee. You may remember me talking about Kirb and the Teamsters National Black Caucus and the courage it took to come out in the face of the International Union, waffling on what they were going to do and actually endorsing the Harris-Walz ticket. So, Kirb, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem at all, Rick. Great seeing you. Great being here, and thank you for having me again, brother.
So let's start with that. I mean, it was an act of courage, I believe, by you and the other members of the Teamsters National Black Caucus to, in a moment when the leadership of the International was waffling and all of us knew he was going to head towards a non-endorsement, that you guys came out and said, nope, we're going to make this endorsement. We're going to stand by it.
We was less than 90 days away when we decided to endorse the Harris-Walz campaign. And it was a no-brainer. And we knew that we had to step up and make it happen, because we need to get boots on the ground, especially in the battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, even North Carolina. We got to make sure that we're leading from the front, and we're telling not only our members, but our families and our friends what the right thing is. And as you say, and Greenhouse also, Trump is not labor's friend.
At no point. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm glad you brought this up. We're only 20 some odd days away from election time. I have still not heard from my union on a position on any get out the vote activity, any organizers on the ground. And I got to tell you, for me, I look at that as a massive win for Donald Trump. And look, I would argue a tacit endorsement.
Oh yeah, and it's sad to say that we have labor leaders that are afraid to talk to the membership and tell the membership what is actually good for them. We got to remind people what is good. Just like I know my wife had to remind me that a salad is good for me. I may not always like it because I love my steak and potato, but she reminds me that the salad is good for me. And she don't mind having that hard conversation with me. And that's what we got to do with our members as leaders, is to have the hard conversation. Because as you say, I lived under Donald Trump leadership in the White House and organizing workers and talking to workers, forming new unions, and also just dealing with the NLRB board appointees that he put in place.
Well, tell me about some of that, because, again, we've got people with very short attention spans, very short memories. I point to the fact that Peter Robb was the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board under Donald Trump, a guy who was instrumental in Reagan firing the Patco workers. That's how far back his anti-labor bona fides go. But now we've got somebody who's just fantastic and doing incredible stuff. It seems like a no-brainer. But walk me through some of your experiences during those 4 years of the Trump term.
Well, it was harder dealing with actual RCs. When I say RCs, those are actual union elections. When you file for election, you had to go through more difficult steps of filing, a longer period in between the time you filed and actually having an election. And that gives the company time to beat up on workers, and actually having captive audience meetings, which I'm going to talk about that in a second. Also, the joint employer memo that Trump them reversed, which has been overturned again. Now, joint employers like Amazon can be held accountable when they actually, quote unquote, say that they're subcontractors, but they actually work for companies like Amazon, FedEx. Talk about captive audience meetings. The general counsel that was appointed under the Vice President Harris and President Biden administration issued a memo back in 2022 actually calling captive audience meetings illegal, and that the companies could be held accountable and fined. Here just last week, 5 companies appealed, and it's looking like the judge is going to tell them to go kick rocks. And this right now, it is a game changer on captive audience meetings, because you got to think about it. The company requires workers that's organizing to come into a meeting and sit there and to listen to all their propaganda, to browbeat them and to beat them down into submission that they're wrong and it's not in their best interest to organize.
And again, I go back to that those captive audience meetings, the length of time between the time you file for an election and you actually get the election done, and the harassment, the intimidation, like we saw at Amazon. So for me in this moment, it seems like a no-brainer, because I see the Teamsters who are doing great work, organizing new places. We're seeing wins all the time. You pointed out the joint employer rule, which is giving them a foot into Amazon. There's some great stuff. I'm still trying to figure out, literally scratching the head, why a non-endorsement?
And I give you this one too. It's mind-boggling that this 45, I call him 45 because I really don't like calling his name, Trump. He laughed with Elon Musk about him firing striking workers. That's our biggest tool in our toolbox.
That should have been right there, that minute. The second that video came out, that audio came out, that should have been, sorry, you're out of the running. We're going the other way. It should have been that immediate.
So I remind my friends that are sometimes confused about who he is, and especially the UPS folks. He laughs at what we have to actually hold a company accountable. The biggest tool that we have is withholding our labor. I know that the brothers and sisters up in 283 don't find it funny, wouldn't find it funny that a potential presidential candidate is laughing at them being on strike and holding the company accountable. And, and Trump said in an interview a couple of days afterwards, when our general president called it economic terrorists, that he actually said that our general president was a great guy and he would understand better than anybody why Elon Musk done what he done. I don't see no labor leader finding it funny that a elected official is laughing at any striking worker being terminated, harassed, or any retribution coming towards them for taking action and standing up for themselves.
Now, I wanted to ask you because, as an organizer, I'm sure you're seeing what's going on. There's a movement of Teamsters against Trump. There's a movement of grassroots member-driven campaign to do the education that the international and Sean O'Brien has failed to do. Are we hopeful that this is going to reach people, or do you think this is not going to be enough? Because I got to tell you, I fear this non-endorsement is going to be enough to get Donald Trump to win a Pennsylvania or a Wisconsin, because Teamsters aren't doing the work of educating their members and allowing them to go, both sides suck.
Yeah, I hope that the likes of Local 200 in Wisconsin, the Joint Council in Wisconsin, Local 623 in Pennsylvania, Local 502 in Pennsylvania, the Joint Council 53 in Pennsylvania. I hope that their actions and their growth in the Teamsters National Black Caucus members in those states actually help us get over the hump. I know other unions are out beating the streets, the COCs, the AFL-CIO. I was out knocking doors last weekend here in Tennessee with Tennessee Fall. So we got to make sure that we engage our members and meet our members where they at. I hope that we're able to reach one and teach one at a time and be able to move our people to the polls in the right manner. But we got to make sure we remind our people, and I say our people, our union members, our friends, our family, our kids' friends, our kids' parents, of the importance of this election, because elections have consequences.
Yeah. Is it hyperbolic to say that this, if given the fact that we've all read Project 2025, given the fact that we know that labor, a target is on the back of organized labor, is it hyperbolic to say that this could be the end of the union movement as we've known it? Because look, from the Reagan firings of the Patco workers until now, there has been a steady decline in union density in this country. Even with the recent organizing wins, it's still in decline. Could this be the final nail in the coffin if Trump is to be elected?
I wouldn't say a final nail. I see some major setbacks, because I say this: the Teamsters are not going to get a pass from this man. The firefighters ain't going to get a pass from this man, because the Teamsters and the firefighters done a no endorsement, because when he come out to labor, he's coming out to labor. He ain't going to carve out a piece for the Teamsters and carve out a piece for the firefighters. The firefighters may get a little bit of more money, but at the end of the day, labor will be under attack. And, I think some of us forgot. Stop the war on workers. That was created because of Trump. He's the reason that we started that slogan. But some of us has forgot that.
So last question I've got for you. As you're out there talking to members, what is the message for them? What are you telling people on their doorsteps? What are you telling folks when you're calling them and saying, hey, can I get a minute of your time to share some stuff with you?
Well, first thing I ask, are you planning on voting in this election? That's the first question. I like to see what people's heads are at, because I don't try, just like in organizing, I ain't trying to sell you a dream. I'm not trying to sell you a product. I'm trying to educate you. I like to see where people are at, what they're thinking, and I like to remind them not to vote against their own best interests. Because at the end of the day, some people just don't know. Some people look at the Teamsters National Black Caucus endorse Harris because she's black. By no means that was the case. And by no means that Harris got our endorsement without long deliberation and long conversations, because we looked at the pro-worker stance. We looked at her standing on the side of organizing, standing on her history, what she done in California on that border. We're looking at us going forward in 2025 with a president that will look out for labor and we can actually have a conversation with.
No.
We know Donald Trump is going to lie to us.
Oh, and get a stab you in the back as well. For me, it comes down to one single vote, because I know old timers who were sweating out the fact that they were going to lose 40, 50, 60% of their pension if Joe Biden didn't get that pension bill passed, and Kamala Harris was the vote that made it possible. So for me, that's the reality right there.
Yes, sir.
But James, I appreciate you taking time for us out of your busy day. Get out there and knock on those doors. Get people out to the polls.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff. Our good friend James Kerbeam. James is the chairman of the Teamsters National Black Caucus, also a member of Teamsters Local 480 there in Nashville, Tennessee. Want to hear your thoughts? You union member, is this a big deal? Is this important? And do you believe that potentially you could really suffer negative consequences under a Trump presidency? I want to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Right back. Thanks for tuning in to The Rick Smith Show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Rick Smith Show, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all that and much more at thericksmithshow.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So in an age of misinformation or disinformation, or what we used to call when I was a kid, lies, common sense, common values, common truths, not so common. In fact, there used to be a saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, not your own facts. Well, in today's world of alternative facts, siloed thinking, instant information, it's so easy to get fooled again. So what's the way forward? How do we figure this out? That's why I've asked author Kenneth C. Davis to come talk with us. You may know his incredible Don't Know Much series, but his latest book, titled The World in Books, 52 Works of Great Short Nonfiction, is here to share some of his thoughts. Kenneth, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you, Rick. And I would just add one other quote there from John Adams before he was the second president. He said, facts are stubborn things. And we should remember that, even in a time when facts seem to be crumbling. Facts are stubborn things.
Yeah, well, you've got an entire industry making up their own realities, and we've seen this for far too long. But I look at this book, this new book you've got out. Couldn't this have been one of your Don't Know Much series? Couldn't this be, Don't Know Much about books?
That's a good question. And the truth is that I started out my career 40 years ago. It's hard to believe that. I know you look at me and you said you must have been a small child, but 40 years ago, I was writing about books. Books are my passion. I lived a life in books. I was a kid. We didn't have a bookstore in my town growing up, but we had a great library and we had a bookmobile and I had great school libraries, which is a point we should come back to and discuss what's happening in school libraries. So I grew up with a love of books. I worked in a bookstore at a certain point and then got started on a career writing. And my very first book was about books. It was called The Two-Bit Culture, the Paperbacking of America, how paperback books really changed the country because they made books available to people where they were, drugstores, train stations, newsstands, and they were all 25 cents or 2 bits. So the world in books is really coming full circle 40 years later. That book was published in 1984. So my passions throughout my professional career have been books and history. Most people know me for, don't know much about history and the other books in the series. In this book, I kind of bring them together because this is a book about books, but it's also about the history of books, the history of ideas, because that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about books. We're talking about ideas. And the introduction, in fact, to the book is called Books Are Weapons in the War of Ideas. It's a quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Which is why I do believe there's a faction in this country trying to ban books. I haven't seen many burnings yet, but give them time.
There have been a few out there. The book Mouse by Art Spiegelman is a brilliant collection of, it's a cartoon, actually a graphic novel, I suppose. It's really a memoir, graphic memoir, in which the Nazis are represented as cats and Polish Jews are represented by mice. And it's a really fascinating and intriguing and singular look at the history of the Holocaust. And a few years ago, it was being banned. And then one teacher in Tennessee, or one pastor in Tennessee, not a teacher, decided it should go into the flames. And, I start out this book, The World in Books, talking about what happened in 1933 Berlin. The Nazis burned books, and not a few, a lot of them. They burned thousands of books across the country, most famously in Berlin. Why? It's not because they were dirty books. It's not because they were pornographic books. They didn't like the ideas. And that's what censorship is really about. People are coming after ideas that are a threat to their power. And 10 years later, in the United States launched a program called Armed Services Editions that gave books away free to people in service around the world during World War II on battleships, bombers, frontline barracks. And the contrast is so stark. This is how and that's where the line comes from. Franklin D. Roosevelt said, books are weapons in the war of ideas. It was the motto of this series. So when I hear about banning books or censoring books, I know from a long history that this is not really about a dirty word or a picture here and there, or about sex that we don't like. This is about ideas we don't like. And this ban of this wave of book banning right now is a white Christian nationalist, highly organized program to attack ideas that these people don't like because they're a threat to their world and their power.
And well-funded by a billionaire class who I would argue it's not even about the ideas, it's more about the control. So as someone who is a bookworm, a book nerd, if you will, and has studied history, a lot of us went through school learning about book burnings and the kind of things that the Nazis did. And it seems like we didn't learn.
Well, we didn't learn, and we've been there have been waves of this throughout American history, and certainly I've written about this. In the 1950s, of course, Joseph McCarthy, led another wave of censorship. He was really focused on getting rid of anything that reeked of socialism. There was actually a school board person in Indiana, I think it was, who wanted to get rid of any books in the school libraries that talked about Robin Hood. Why? Robin Hood stole from the rich and gave to the poor. That's socialism. So, it's kind of funny to say Robin Hood was blacklisted. I wrote a piece on my website called that. But McCarthy sent the notorious Roy Cohn, who was his younger assistant at the time, into the State Department libraries in Europe to clear out books. Again, hundreds of books, because they didn't like those ideas. And at the time, President Eisenhower actually stood up in a commencement at Dartmouth, I believe it was, in 1953, and he said, don't join the book burners. Beyond that, he didn't do much to stop McCarthy. But I'll tell you who did: librarians. The librarians said, we are not going to have this. In 1953, they announced the first Bill of Rights of readers, and that's what we've been fighting about ever since, this idea that some small group of people can determine what the rest of us can read. It's an un-American idea, and I'm happy to say that there's been tremendous pushback, both on the grassroots level and from book publishers, the American Library Association, the PEN, which is the Organization of Writers and Novelists, and the National Coalition Against Censorship. So people are fighting back, but it is a struggle. It's a daily struggle, and librarians and school teachers are losing their jobs. They're being harassed. So this is a serious thing. And one of the things I write in The World in Books in the introduction is that when you see throughout history a Mussolini, a Hitler, a Stalin, a Mao, what do? They put the intellectuals and the writers in jail. They take away the books. First, they come for the books. So there's a really important idea when we think about this. This is not just a few school kids losing access to books. This is an attempt to take away freedom.
No, you're right, which is why my friend Randy Weingarten, the president of AFT, they've given out, I think, 10 million books over the last couple of years just for this thing. Now, it's interesting, you brought up Roy Cohn, who is an interesting figure in American history, with ties from McCarthy to Donald Trump. Do you see a connection in the kind of rhetoric from our former president?
Completely. Roy Cohn was probably the most influential person in Donald Trump's life, apart from his own father. And in fact, many people might argue that Roy Cohn became a father figure to Donald Trump when he was a young New York City builder trying to make his way in the world. And so all of the techniques that you see Trump using in court, in public, are techniques that Roy Cohn understood going back to the McCarthy era. And so this is a line through in American history that we can follow. And of course, it's a dangerous one. And that's why I wrote this book, because I think that, first of all, to celebrate the freedom to read and the idea that we should all be free to read, and we must read. You know, we're in a time when people's attention spans have been really rotted away. Yeah. Television.
And social media is no help. I mean, you look at this doom scrolling that goes on. If you can't get someone's attention in 3 or 4 seconds, you've lost them.
And the idea that, we can reduce everything to 120 characters is a very dangerous idea. The Atlantic magazine just published a very scary and important piece from elite colleges saying that kids coming into the elite colleges, can't read a novel. They're not able to read a novel. That's really a distressing idea to me as a writer, as a person who cares about a civic society. We need to read, to learn, to understand, to know, but most of all, to think. Yeah. Reading encourages thinking, and what we need now more than ever before are people who are able to think for themselves and think critically. And I believe, and I've put this book out there because I think that reading is a key to being able to think critically for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, one of the comments I saw attributed to you is you said your goal as a writer was to help eradicate thoughtlessness. And I thought that was an interesting way of saying we need people to think. We need people to think and have filters and not just look for the internet for their confirmation bias. I thought it was an interesting statement.
I'm going to just reference that. It goes back to the great Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, public intellectual, in her book about the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi who was captured and then put on trial in Jerusalem. And she said that it was really a function of his ability to do these things was thoughtlessness, not a casual thoughtlessness, but to do things without thinking. And that's how dangerous the times are that we are in. People are doing things, saying things without thinking about them. That's the kind of thoughtlessness that Hannah Arendt was talking about when she was talking about what Adolf Eichmann and other Nazis were capable of. Yeah. And again, it starts with burning books in 1933 and goes on from there. Because as someone wrote a long, long time ago, where they will burn books, they will also burn people.
Excellent point. The book, The World in Books, 52 Works of Great Short Nonfiction. I want to get back to this, Kenneth Davis, because look, I look at this, and the first thing I thought of as I was going through the list of stories that you threw in here, is this a collection of the forbidden? Because I got to tell you, I've been waiting for that. Join the banned book club. I think kids would love it. I know I would have. Because when I was a kid, there was a rap band called Two Live Crew. Maybe you heard of them, maybe you didn't. They weren't worth hearing of. But they had an album out that was out forever. But as soon as someone said, hey, you can't do that, you can't listen. No, it's banned. Everyone bought the damn thing. So, by banning these books, are you hopeful, as I am, that maybe, like my high school reading list that seems to be banned, that kids are going to want this now because, well, it's the forbidden fruit?
I think there's something to that, of course. Yes, I know Two Live Crew, and I believe that the parental advisory on albums might have been invented for them. I'm not sure of that. Somebody might correct me, but it was certainly one of the earliest examples.
As soon as they slapped that label on, everybody had to get it.
Well, in publishing, it used to be if the book got banned in Boston, which was a very, very conservative town in those days, not because of the Catholic Church necessarily, but old-line blue-nosed Protestants didn't like books like Peyton Place or James M. Cain, and they banned them. Publishers loved it. They would say banned in Boston on the top of the book, and that would be an instant bestseller then. So there's an aspect of that is true, that when you highlight these books that are banned, people then go and want to find out why they're being banned. I mentioned the book Mouse a few minutes ago, this graphic novel about the Holocaust. When it was first announced that it was being banned, it shot straight to the top of the bestseller list. And that's good in a sense, but there are still a lot of people for whom going and purchasing a book is not an option. And so when you remove books from school libraries and public libraries, you're taking them out of the hands of people who can't afford to go to the bookstore or go online and buy it for themselves. And that's the importance of the public library and the school library, to make available to all people these ideas, these books, these writers that make us think.
So let me ask you last line of questioning to get into this book a little bit. What made you choose these particular 52? What is it that draws them together, that brings them together in your mind, and why do you think why do you think people should find them important?
That's a really great and important question. I addressed that right off the bat in the front of the book. First of all, they're all short. We talked about our attention spans have come down. They're short because I believe people need to start slowly to start reading. So these are books that are 200 pages or less. Many of them are much less than that. You can sit down and read them maybe in one reading, but certainly in a week's time. So 52 books is a year of great reading. I wanted to capture some of the great thinkers and ideas and writers of books through history that have actually changed the world and changed people. So they start from the earliest recorded literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Book of Genesis, one of the books in the Bible. The Bible is a collection of many books. Genesis is one of them. So those books are there. So I had the first length. Second of all, consequence. Were these books important in their time, and have they continued to be important? And are they important today, which I call timeliness? Hiroshima, a book that was published in 1946, talks about the aftermath of the atomic bomb. It's not about politics. It's not about the science of the bomb. It's not about the war. It's about what happened to 6 people after the bomb was dropped. And I was interested to see that the Nobel Peace Prize went to a group that came out of survivors of Hiroshima. So that's the timeliness of this. That was a book that changed my life when I read it as a kid. So I wanted to include that. And finally, the last important thing, I think, is accessibility and the pleasure of the reading. Because, we all had to read books in school and they weren't so interesting. I want people to enjoy what they're reading here and make them think about things that they might have questioned. So again, consequence and timeliness. One of the books I include is a very short little book called The Communist Manifesto. Most people have never read Marx and Engels for themselves. Read it. Find out what these guys said in the 19th century that affected all of 20th century history. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. It was one of the most profoundly influential books in history, but most people have never cracked it open for themselves.
Yeah, we've been afraid of it. We've been scared with it. In fact, we've been told socialism's bad. Well, capitalism stole our pensions, our jobs, our future. But hey, socialism's bad.
Well, that's why I want people to read and think for themselves, and it's really easy to do. It's a fascinating book, and for each of these books, I not only say give a little excerpt, say what's in this book. I talk about the authors and the times in which they lived and what happened to them. Of course, we're talking about censoring books. You have to start with, and I mentioned McCarthy. Marx would have been on the top of McCarthy's list to get rid of from the library. So read it for yourself. Don't be afraid of it. And don't let people tell you what's in it. Read it for yourself. Think for yourself. That's what my whole point is here. Yeah. A couple of other quick books that are included in this that might be of interest to you in particular. Nickel and Dimes by Barbara Ehrenreich, book that came out nearly 25 years ago. Very, very consequential. Barbara Ehrenreich was a writer who decided that she was going to take low-wage jobs to see what it was like to survive. She worked as a waitress, she worked as a cleaner, and she worked in a Walmart 20 years ago, nearly 25 years ago. That book is as timely and consequential today, of course, because people are still living from week to week and worse in many cases. So a really important book for our times, and so well written and enjoyable and fun to write. I quote her briefly saying, when she was working at Walmart, the only thing that mattered was that 15-minute break. You go out and get some fresh air, sit down for a minute and pee. And that was, really important to her because otherwise she couldn't. Yeah. And the last one I'll quickly mention, because we talked about book burnings, is Helen Keller. And that might be a surprise to a lot of people. Helen Keller's books were burned by the Nazis because many people don't know that after she was that little girl who learned how to spell water, she became a very, very active socialist. She joined the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. A very different perception of Helen Keller than we might have. So I included her book, The World I Live In, and talk about her activism. She was one of the founders of the ACLU, something nobody ever told me when I was growing up.
No, I didn't know that either. The Wobblies I did, and the burning I did. Not that. Something I'll have to check into. And this book, I hope people will take a look at it. The World in Books, 52 works of great short nonfiction. I think a great resource written by Kenneth Davis. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at it. Kenneth, really great talking with you. I hope you come back and talk to us again real soon.
It would be my pleasure anytime. Great believer in working class heroes.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Kenneth Davis, the book, The World in Books, 52 works of great short nonfiction. Check it out. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You're going to put this on your reading list? Could be a whole year of good reads. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day that the National March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights took place in Washington, D.C. Estimates of marchers ranged from as few as 75,000 to as many as 200,000. The year of the march was significant. It marked the 10th anniversary of the police raid at the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York's Greenwich Village. When police raided Stonewall, it sparked a series of protests that helped launch the modern LGBT rights movement. 10 years later, gay and lesbian Americans still faced significant employment and legal discrimination. Many also faced violence. The published program for the event included a tribute to Harvey Milk, the openly gay member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors who had been assassinated a year earlier. Lyrics to the song Harvey Milk's Body was written to the tune of John Brown's Body. The program also included an article urging march participants to lobby Capitol Hill for justice. A sample letter to Congress was printed as a template. It noted that many lesbian and gay men faced unjust discrimination in employment and called for change. The march organizers issued 5 demands. The second demand was that President Carter issue an order banning discrimination based on sexual orientation in the federal government, the military, and federally contracted private employment. The program included a list of organizations that supported the march. Not many labor unions endorsed, with a few notable exceptions, such as the Actors Equity Association, 3 AFSCME locals, and 1 American Federation of Teachers local. More demonstrations in Washington, D.C. followed. A march held in 1993 drew crowds estimated at 1 million, a powerful gathering for the movement to end LGBT discrimination.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I think Kenneth Davis's book is timely in that we're hearing a lot about censorship, and the right especially. Oh my goodness, the left is trying to make us not use words. Yet on the right, what they're doing is they're trying to ban books and burn books, and I like the way Kenneth Davis puts it. It's really about thought. It's really about ensuring that society thinks only a certain way. And we hear a lot from the right about freedom. And don't you think freedom to be able to read whatever you want, don't you think that's kind of a freedom? Kind of important, maybe something we might want to protect? Something that we might want for our children? Maybe just a thought? And look, I remember, as Kenneth was talking about, he brought up bookmobiles. In my neighborhood, we didn't have a library. Once every other week, a bookmobile would come through for a couple of hours on a Saturday, and you got everyone rushed there to get what they could, get their hands on. And it did. It opened up other worlds, other opportunities. And I remember reading a lot of sci-fi stuff, a lot of that futuristic stuff, because, look, the world that I was living in was not great. I lived in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. Poverty was everywhere. The man's inhumanity to man was fully on display. So any respite from reality was a good thing. So I remember reading a lot of, the Ray Bradbury's, the books that just would take you to what the future could be. And gave, if not, a moment away from reality, but a thought process. And I would argue it's part of why this country's always been, an innovator, because we're a thoughtful society, or we have been. I fear we're getting away from it. And I fear that it's the very people who are claiming that there's censorship everywhere who are the ones who are censoring things. If you don't want your kids reading certain kind of books at a certain age, maybe know what they're reading. Maybe participate in that. Maybe have books available for them. And, because since my wife's accident, I've been spending a lot of time, looking around the house going, what do I need to change? What do I need to move? How do we reconfigure the house to make it handicap accessible? If that's what we need to do, as a planner, I'm going through all these things and I'm looking around and I'm going, my goodness, we've got books everywhere from kindergarten all the way up through, high school and college reading age. One of the things that my wife did really, really well was instill the love of reading in our children. And I want that for every kid. I want them to be explorers and to think in ways critically when they hear something, run it through a series of filters, BS filters if you need, but to be able to be thoughtful, critical thinking citizens. Capable of detecting the you-know-what. But I think his book's a book worth looking into. The World in Books, 52 works of great short nonfiction. I know I'm looking forward to reading through a good portion of it. But as always, I appreciate you taking some time for us. If you miss any portion of the program, the podcast, that's where you go to get the podcast, thericksmithshow.com or wherever you get yours. Freespeech.org. For folks who want to send my wife a message, I've gotten some folks who are saying, hey, how can we send Carol a message? If you want to write letters, Carol, Carol Smith, P.O. Box 1026, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, 17013. We've really loved the folks who have reached out. Thank you. Again, thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.